How much did the New York Giants inch towards being a competitive football club in 2025? We explore that and more coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, big welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And happy Monday to everybody. We're another week closer to the NFL draft, and there's going to be plenty to talk about regarding the draft in the days to come. But today's show, what I thought we'd do is take a look at where the Giants roster currently stands. Are they improved on offense? Are they improved on defense? Where are the questions that still remain? Basically, how close are they to being more competitive than what they showed last year and the year before? So we're going to take the offense first, then we're going to talk about the defense. And then in the final segment, we're going to kind of spin ahead towards the draft, and that we're going to take a look at what might be the Giants' best quarterback option in the draft. So that's our schedule of topics for today. Again, welcome on into everybody. Let's get into it. All right, let's talk about the offense, the Giants' offense. Are they better or worse? That depends. Okay, now really, if you look at what the Giants have done on offense, the most significant change is at quarterback, because they basically had to redo that whole quarterback room, as we all know. The Giants otherwise basically added some depth at receiver for special teams. They added some depth on the offensive line at tackle, but really not a whole lot of changes. So let's take a look at each position. So at quarterback, obviously last year quarterback, the play was a big problem, whether it was Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, Tim Boyle. The Giants just did not get consistent quarterback play. So the Giants double dipping in free agency this year. They added Jameis Winston on a backup salary. They have Russell Wilson coming in on a starter salary. And they, of course, brought back Tommy DeVito, who is going to be kind of like the bridge guy in that he's the one that has the most experience in this offensive system. So he's going to be kind of like the bridge as far as helping everybody else get acclimated to the offensive system that the Giants run. So the Giants, the quarterback situation, is it better than what it was last year? I think we can say that. I think that's safe to say. Is it where it needs to be? No. All right. They still need to address the long term, which again, we'll talk about down the line in in segment 3. But the quarterback situation, I think, all things considered, better than it was last year and the year before, injuries notwithstanding. So that seems to be going in the right direction. All right, running back. Again, the Giants didn't really add to that group. They have Tyrone Tracy Jr. as their starter. Devin Singletary is going to be RB2. But down the line, the Giants probably will want to add to that group. And I think, this year with the running back class being so deep in the draft, they're going to want to add. All right, because Singletary is collecting the last of his guaranteed money this year. After this year, they can move on from him. So get a young guy in here now, groom him, teach him all the fundamentals of pass blocking as a running back, and then maybe you make the transition after this year. Tight end and wide receiver, right? The Giants basically at tight end brought back Chris Manhertz. I don't hate that move. Chris Manhertz was one of their better blockers last year. But again, they're going to probably want to address that position down the line because Daniel Bellinger is entering the last year of his contract. Manhertz is only signed for 1 year. You're going to want to have depth behind Theo Johnson. And is Greg Dulcich the answer? He may be. He may not be. We'll have to see. But you're going to probably want to add depth at some point there as well. Offensive line, or actually receiver. basically a lot of the moves the Giants made at receiver, other than for the Darius Slayton signing, I think were for special teams more so than anything. Now, what I'm curious to see is if the Giants are going to shift anything in their offensive scheme, because they did add a couple of skyscrapers, Zach Pascal and Lil Jordan Humphrey. All right. So those are guys who are taller receivers. The Giants have a collection of guys who are basically 6 foot and under at the receiver group. And that was one of the, the characteristics, underrated characteristics that I think they sought to correct moving forward. Offensive line, really, the offensive tackle, they brought in swing guys, in James Hudson III, Stone Forsythe. They brought back Greg Van Roten and Aaron Stinney to play guard. So really that guard position remains a question mark, but it looks like if all things fail, that Van Roten will probably be the guy starting again like he did last year. And then this year, because of the injuries they had to tackle and the fact that they couldn't find anybody to really step in and play left tackle for Andrew Thomas when he went down, now they got two guys that can compete to do that. So they seem to be in good shape there. So that all being said, for the offense, are they trending in the right direction? I would say yes. The one concern I have, however, is who's going to be calling the plays. Is it going to be head coach Brian Daboll? Is he going to go back to offensive coordinator Mike Kafka? Now, you've heard me say on this program before that I think it would be in the best interest of the Giants if they went back to Kafka. If they were going to do that, this would be the year to do it. All right. And I see that because last year, I always got the impression that Daboll was so wrapped up with the offense that he didn't really spend as much time with the defense and special teams, both of which were just as much of a problem as anything on the team. And this year, it looks like, he's going to try and make more of an effort to spend time with those units. So does that mean he gives up the play calling? I don't see a problem with that. Look, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, they're experienced quarterbacks. It's not like you need Daboll to kind of hold their hand. You can probably go back to Mike Kafka, who, by the way, is entering the final year of his contract. Whether he stays with the Giants beyond this year or this coming year remains to be seen. But for play calling, that's really where I have the biggest question mark. How are they going to adapt the offense to fit what Russell Wilson does well? Any other skill position players that they bring in? I mean, Malik Neighbors is going to be the wide receiver one. He's going to get a lot of targets. Wan'Dale Robinson hopefully won't get as many targets as he did last year, but he'll still get his fair share. Slayton is back. We know what he can do. Theo Johnson was very promising. So, we'll see what year two brings for him. So really it all boils down to, again, offensive line. Can they hold up? And how are they going to tweak the offense to better suit what they have? Because last year with this revolving door quarterback, it was a disaster. And when we saw competent quarterback play from the Giants, we actually saw decent and winning football. So we'll see how that plays out for the Giants. But I do think overall, the offense, even though they don't have the long-term quarterback in place, which again, we'll talk about in segment 3, I think the offense is heading in the right direction. Now, is it going to be a scoring juggernaut? That remains to be seen. Obviously, health and how they treat the offense and all that stuff, that's going to all factor into it. So as we go through the spring and the OTAs and the mini camps, maybe we'll get a little better idea as to what tweaks are going to be made, if any at all. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball and what they basically did and didn't do, and are they any closer to being more competitive for the Giants? So that's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always going to be something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com today and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'm scheduled to sit with Jordan Reed, ESPN draft analyst. He is supposed to come on with me on Tuesday. So he's going to tape with me Tuesday. So that'll be Wednesday show. And then also I'm going to start reaching out to my Locked On college hosts to kind of get a feel for some of these prospects who have been linked to the Giants in mock drafts. So we'll start reaching out to those guys and gals and have them come on and talk a little bit more about their prospects, what they see, how they think they'll adapt to the NFL level, and so on. So that's what's coming up here on Locked On Giants as we continue to be 5 days a week for you, leading into the draft, leading into the spring football practices, and right up into that dead period right before training camp. Well, then we take a little bit of a break here on Locked On. All right, let's talk about the New York Giants defense. Again, we're discussing how much closer, how much more improved is the New York Giants across the board. All right, so we just finished with the offense. Let's talk defense. We'll start with the defensive line. The defensive line, basically what the Giants did, they added depth to rotate guys, to maybe take some of the onus off of a Dexter Lawrence, who basically was playing an unhealthy amount of snaps. All right, so these guys that they brought in, the Ledbetters, the Chauncey Golstons, these are guys that are going to provide depth across the defensive line. All right, they're still missing from the Giants defensive line, in my opinion, is the starting 3 technique tackle. All right, so if Dexter Lawrence is your nose, you want to have a 3 tech next to him. And I do think the Giants are going to go into the draft to get that guy. I would be absolutely shocked and disappointed if the Giants don't draft the defensive lineman in what is a deep defensive lineman class. All right. So the defensive line is vastly improved. They went back to veteran depth after last year, realizing that the young depth that they had really wasn't getting it done. So they now have, like I said, a deeper rotation to where they could bring guys in to give, starters a rest as they need them. So that unit is definitely headed in the right direction. The linebackers, basically with the linebackers, they brought in guys for special teams. All right. Now, can some of these guys play on the defense if you need them to? Yes. But primarily that group is special teams, because special teams, as you all know, wasn't very good last year, wasn't very consistent. So the Giants really brought in a lot of guys who could help on special teams. And most of those guys are at the linebacker spot. So that unit, eventually they're going to need to add guys to that unit for, full-time defensive roles. But right now they should be fine with what they've got. So no problem there. The edge group. Okay, so they brought in Golston, who can play defensive line. He's probably better with his hand in the dirt, but if he needs to stand up, they can play him standing up. But right now, the outside guys, you have Kayvon Thibodeau, you've got Brian Burns, you've got Tamon Fox. I'd really like to see the Giants get another, pure edge rusher, an outside linebacker who's going to play from a 2-point stance as opposed to a 3-point stance. I just feel like they don't really have that guy yet. That's not to say that they don't have enough pass rushing power on the defense, but, as Ernie Accorsi once said, you can never have too many pass rushers. And I really think they need to address that, whether it be they go with Abdul Carter, or if they wait, maybe they get somebody later on in the draft. The edge rusher class is really not that bad this year, so they could do that. But, I always go back to 2007, 2011, when the Giants were at least 3 deep in outside, actually at the time they were defensive ends because they were running a 4-3. So I go back to those days when the Giants were just so deep at outside guys, outside rushers, defensive ends. And, I miss those days. And I think those days are important to try to get back to. All right. The defensive secondary. If you want to pick one unit on this team that has undergone the most transition for the better, okay, outside of quarterback, the quarterback room obviously underwent a lot of transition, but for the better, you go with defensive backs. All right. So they've added playmakers back there. They've added Javon Holland at safety. They've added Paulson Adebo at cornerback. I would really love to see them add Travis Hunter if he is there. Now, you're probably saying, well, where would Travis Hunter play if they add him? Because, they've got Deontay Banks still. Trust me, folks, they will find a place for Travis Hunter. That's a kid who you bring him in and he can just really, be a dual weapon for you, not just in terms on the defense, but also on the offense. And let's face it, can we honestly sit here and say that the Giants have enough playmakers on both sides of the ball? I don't think we can. And, I know I've said, in my mock draft that I would go with Abdul Carter, but the more I think about it, the value that you would get with Travis Hunter at pick number 3 overall, you're getting a guy who could play on the defense full time, give you maybe, a handful of snaps on offense. Are you going to find better value anywhere on a guy in this draft class? I don't think so. So to me, if Hunter is sitting there, he's the guy that I think you really have to consider. And again, I know they have a Debo. I know they've got Deontay Banks. You can never have too many cornerbacks because you'll find ways to use them. So, that's up to Shane Bowen, obviously, the defensive coordinator, to figure it out. But I'm sure there are ways that they can use those guys. And I would love to see, how they could work somebody like Travis Hunter into the mix. All right. Now, overall, the defense is headed in the right direction. But here's the one concern I continue to have about the defense. And I just kind of mentioned his name before. And that is Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator. When Bowen came to the Giants last year, I kept saying that I didn't feel he was flexible enough in what he was doing to adapt to the talent he had, to adapt to their strengths and cover up their weaknesses. I felt like he was just running what he was used to and, hoping for the best. And the best didn't always come. So my biggest question for the Giants defense, and if they have truly taken that step forward from last year, is Bowen going to be a little bit more flexible in what he does? Or is he going to stick to what he has always done and just say, okay, you know what? We'll just play it by ear and hope that everything falls into place. That would be my biggest concern with the Giants defense. But from a personnel perspective, I do think they've improved. All right. Just as I thought they've improved on offense. Now, bottom line, do I think the Giants are ready to compete for a playoff spot? Let's put it this way. I'm not going to peg them for winning the NFC East. I don't think they come close. Do I think they might qualify for a wild card spot? I'm not ready to say that yet. Do I think they're going to win more than 3 games this year, despite the fact that they have a heck of a schedule of opponents? That I'm willing to say. How many? I don't know. I'd have to kind of see how everything shakes out. It's kind of too early to do all that stuff, but we'll see how that all shakes out. But I do think that there's improvement here. I think, as I've said on other shows, Joe Schoen has learned some lessons about roster building that maybe he didn't exercise the last 2 years. Like, for example, trying to fit square pegs into round holes, trying to, double down on mistakes. Like, for example, playing Joshua Ezeudu a tackle when it was clear he wasn't a tackle. I'd like to see if they're going to definitely cross-train Evan Neal at guard, which I believe is going to be the case. So there are still some things we need to see. But overall, I think the Giants are at a point now where they addressed a lot of needs as far as depth goes. They haven't addressed the most important position, long-term quarterback. All right. Now, speaking of long-term and quarterback, we're going to talk about that in the next segment. We're going to talk about which direction the Giants should go in for the future at the most important position, as Joe Schoen calls it, on the roster. So that's coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And in this segment, we've been talking about the Giants roster and how can it improve and has it improved. But the one position that the jury's still kind of out on, even though the Giants added veteran depth, is quarterback. Because ideally, look, you want to get your franchise guy. You want to get him in here as soon as possible, start grooming him, let him, develop so that when the time comes, you can turn over the reins and say, okay, here you go. Now, if you look at how the Giants set up their quarterback situation this year, Jameis Winston is signed to a 2-year deal, clearly a backup. Clearly, the expectation is he will be on the roster in 2026. Russell Wilson, 1-year deal. Now, whether that was because Wilson only wanted a 1-year deal or the Giants wanted to just give him a 1-year deal because they're planning to take a guy that they're going to basically sit and develop and see what happens, that you can go either way. All right. The Giants haven't said it. Russell Wilson didn't say if that was, his desire. It's a valid question. So that all being said, how does that set things up for the Giants? Well, the popular opinion is that if Shedeur Sanders is on the board, he's the guy the Giants should take. I am not convinced the Giants go that way at number 3. All right. Now, if the Giants maybe wanted to trade back into the bottom of the first and say Jackson Dart was in there, or, if Shedeur Sanders was still sitting there, then maybe it makes sense. But at number 3, I think that might be a little bit of a reach. All right. So what I think the Giants are going to do is they're going to draft a quarterback. I do not think it's going to be a day 1 pick. All right. I know, Jackson Dart has been mentioned. He's been linked to the Giants. I don't think he's going to get out of the first round. I don't think Shedeur Sanders is going to get out of the first round. I think Shedeur Sanders will probably go a little later in the draft, in the first round. All right. So for the Giants, do you trade away assets to get back into the bottom of the first round? You could, but do you need depth more importantly? Yes. Do you necessarily want to touch next year's draft class to trade back into the bottom of the first round? Probably not. All right. If anything, if you can't get Travis Hunter and you have your doubts about Abdul Carter, you trade down. You get additional stock, including maybe next year's number 1 of whoever you're trading with. So that this way, if you decide you want to trade up next year to get your franchise quarterback, you can do so, since next year's quarterback class is going to be deeper. Now, all things said, why do I say they should draft a quarterback this year? Because get him in here, start developing him, and see what you have. There is no rule that says a team's franchise quarterback has got to come in the first round. There is no rule that says that if you pick a guy in the top 5 spots of the draft, that guy is going to automatically be a gold jacket candidate, right? We've seen just as many busts in the first round at quarterback as we have seen success stories. And if you look at the some of the other teams in the NFC East, Jalen Hurts was not a first-round pick. Dak Prescott was not a first-round pick, right? And the Eagles just won a Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts as their quarterback. So this obsession that some people seem to have about, oh, the Giants got to draft a quarterback in round 1. No, not necessarily, folks. They have to draft the right guy, a guy who can be developed, a guy who fits what they do, and a guy who has an upside. All right. So the guys with upside, I mentioned Jackson Dart. He has an upside. Although Dart, the more I look at it, the more I question if whether he's an exact fit for what the Giants do. I keep coming back, ladies and gentlemen, to Tyler Shough of Louisville. All right. Now, what do I like about him? Well, he is a developmental prospect. Let's call it what it is. He's a guy who, if the Giants draft, he can sit and he can develop behind the 2 veterans, which again has always been the plan. I've said this before. That's always the plan, to have a young guy come in and let him develop behind the veteran guys. Let those guys do the heavy lifting and redshirt the rookie guy. So with Shough, all right, what do I like about him? He's a pure pocket passer. He has good enough arm strength to do the intermediate throws as well as the deep throws, good vision, good confidence. He is has decent mobility, not the greatest. I don't think he's the type of guy, especially given his injury history, that I would send on a whole lot of quarterback runs. But if you need him to get out of trouble, he's got the mobility to do that. He can avoid sacks. Now, people will say, but he's also one of the oldest draft picks in this class. He's going to be 26 by week 1 of the 2025 season. Well, so what? How old? Michael Penix last year, weren't we saying the same thing about him? How he was an older prospect, how he had an injury history. Did that affect his draft stock? Did that affect, what he put out on the field? It didn't. So anybody who's dismissing Tyler Shough because he's an older prospect or because he's an injury prone guy, I don't think that's, the way to go. And again, if you're taking him on day 2 and he doesn't work out, you go back next year and you take another swing when the class is going to be deeper. But if he does work out, now maybe you have a guy who you don't have to worry about a quarterback next year. Or maybe you have a guy that, can be your QB2 at some point. So there's more than one angle here that you could take with the quarterback, but this insistence that the Giants have got to take one in the first round, otherwise they're, what's the point? I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. I think, there's been enough cases throughout history where if you go through all the quarterbacks taken in the first round, who's worked out, who hasn't, then you look at some of the quarterbacks taken in the second and third rounds and so forth, you'll see that, not taking a quarterback in the first round isn't necessarily a death sentence for a team that is quarterback needy. So I'm curious to see what the Giants do. I don't think they're going to get Jackson Dart. Like I said, I think Jackson Dart and Shedeur Sanders will probably go in the first round, but I don't see the Giants going for either one of them at number 3. So you've got to look towards the next batch of quarterbacks, and Tyler Shough is right there in that next group of quarterbacks, along with Kyle McCord of Syracuse and Jalen Milroe of Alabama. So we'll see which one the Giants like best, if any. And of course, we will keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast as we continue to count down towards the draft. Again, tomorrow we're going to have, Wednesday's show. I keep saying tomorrow because we're taping tomorrow, but on Wednesday, Jordan Reed of ESPN is the scheduled guest, so we'll hear from him. And I'm going to see if I could start booking some Locked On college hosts to tell us about their school prospects. So that's all coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And before we say goodbye, speaking of the draft, please check out Locked On NFL Draft, hosted by Damian Parson and Coach Keith Sanchez. The two of them will give you prospect rankings, observations. With pro days wrapping up, they've got so much to talk about, latest rumors, all that good stuff. So if you want the very best draft coverage, check out Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great one.